Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about something that's changing right under our feet right now. How the role of developers is evolving with AI and agentic coding tools. I recently gave a presentation at CodeFire Technologies to all the developers about this exact same topic, how to survive and grow in the new AI-driven coding paradigm. And I realized that this shouldn't stay in our company only. So which is where I'm trying to share the same thing with all of you now. So here's the reality. Developers are scared that AI will take their jobs. But here's what's actually happening. For at least next 3 to 5 years, it's developers who know how to use AI effectively, replacing the ones who don't. So this video gives you comprehensive guide on how to survive and thrive in this changing landscape. So let's dive in. So the first step of the process is learn the new tools. Before we dig deeper into that, let me try to explain how the traditional software development used to work. So basically, the project manager would sit with their client, write detailed requirements, right? And then the tech lead or the architect would go through the requirements, decide the technology stack for the back end, for the front end, database, and everything, right? That's what the architect's role would have been. And then the task, the complete application would be broken down into simpler modules and then classes and then those functions, and then those tasks would be delegated out to the developer to carry out those tasks, where you have to write a class or you have to write a function or you have to implement a API endpoint, right? This was very specific and very detailed workflow that would be given out to the developers. So basically, that was a traditional approach of software development where you would have complete requirements and very detailed breakdown of requirements, and you would start writing code by hand, right? But in the new process, we have already moved towards agentic development, right? So one of the very basic fundamental skills that you have to learn is learn agentic coding. Just like knowing programming fundamentals would let you switch between languages, and if you knew the fundamentals how the program works, if you knew one language, let's say C++ or let's say PHP, you could very easily switch over to Python, or you could very easily switch over to Node or React or JavaScript, right? So similarly, in today's world, you need to learn the fundamentals of agentic coding, how to use agents for coding. You could pick up any particular IDE or a CLI. CLI is command line interface kind of tools, right? There are plenty of those. So pick up one of those, learn agentic coding, right? You could pick Cursor or Windsurf, or latest launched by Google is Antigravity, right? Any of those GUI based IDE, or you could even go to a CLI command line interface kind of thing with OpenCode, which is open source. I generally prefer open source kind of thing. So I generally work with OpenCode, right? So you could use OpenCode, or you could use, a lot of people are using Claude Code or Gemini CLI or Codex as well, right? All of these are really powerful command line agentic AI development tools. So just pick one, stick to that, learn the fundamentals, learn how it works, right? So that you know all the nuances, and then it becomes really easy to switch over from one IDE to another IDE as and when required. So while you're learning that agentic AI capability with these tools, you need to understand how to describe those features, how to describe the technology stack, how to describe the features, how to effectively give prompts, right? Everything with that particular IDE or CLI that you're using. Now, for doing that, you have to invest your time into this. Obviously, while working on a project in a company, let's assume that you're a developer who's working at a company, right? So the company may give you exposure to this, may not give you exposure to this, right? Depending on how quickly the company itself is evolving. But you as a developer have to survive in the marketplace, right? So you'll have to invest your time. You should invest your time. You should try and learn one of these, agentic coding environments, right? For that, you have to invest your time. It could be over the weekend, it could be over the evenings, whenever you have some time, right? Plus, you will probably need to invest some money as well, because most of the good AI coding models are all paid. For example, Claude Sonnet 4.5, or Gemini 3, or any other model from OpenAI, right? All of these models are paid, so you will have to kind of pay for it to use it, right? Or there is a very interesting free model which I generally prefer and use a lot, right? Which is Grok Code Fast one, which works with OpenCode, and it's totally free on that stack. So for learning purpose, you can definitely use that stack to learn the complete details, right? And then become proficient, and then probably invest some money as well, right? Because you need to know what are the best models and what are the limitations of those models. Now, some of the things that I experienced, and I personally experienced, and I figured out, and which I'm going to tell you a step basically. So like I already said, Grok Code Fast One is a really good coding model, and it's totally free right now when you use it with OpenCode. So you can definitely use that stack to learn it, right? But apart from that, I tried using the APIs for Claude Sonnet 4.5. I tried using Gemini 3 Pro APIs, right? So those APIs become very expensive very quickly. So for example, I started coding with Sonnet 4.5, right? Within an hour or two, I ended up spending almost $20, right? So which is where if you use a monthly subscription, if you want to use the paid models, go into a monthly subscription where you get a model for $20 for a month. Obviously that subscription would not let you use the model the whole time. Like it will not be available completely to you. They have set limits as to how much the model can work for you in a day, right? But within those limits, you get sufficient time to experiment and learn those models. So you should invest in a monthly subscription rather than API based. API based seems like you pay only when you use it, but then it turns out really becomes very costly very quickly. At CodeFire, we did a vibe coding session in the March of this year, and then we again did it in September, October this year, and the approach was completely different. So keep in mind that these new paradigms that you're learning, the new agentic coding that you're learning, is going to evolve and going to change very quickly, most likely in next 6 months. AI models are evolving, so are these tools as well. So as already explained, the first part of the process is learn the tools. The next part of the process is evolution in terms of basically adapt to new processes. With new tools, the processes are also changing. And when I say processes, I mean the development. So currently I'm talking completely from the perspective of a developer, right? So from developer's perspective, the whole thing is completely changing. Earlier, you were getting very detailed specifications on what this class or this function needs to do, right? Now you would get a high level functional description as to, this functionality needs to be implemented, right? And then you will basically orchestrate that outcome. You will ensure that, that feature requirement is met. So it's not a very granular description for you now. It's going to be a broad description, but you have to ensure as a developer to figure out what nuances of that functionality are, and you have to implement all of that, right? So you have to be more output driven rather than basically specs driven. Earlier, when we used to write code, we used to think through the complete process. We used to think about all the nuances, and then you would want to write the code which was perfect in the first iteration itself, right? That's what we used to strive for. Not anymore. Currently, you will get a high level description of the functionality, and you would probably use AI to do a rough draft of that functionality, try to use that functionality, and then see what limitations or what issues you are facing with that functionality, and then you will try to evolve that. So that functionality would itself evolve. I mean, in the next section of this presentation, I'll give you a concrete example on how I did it so that you'll be able to relate to this more. But the point is, basically, you'll have to loop through that idea. You'll have to create a rough draft. You'll have to try it. You'll have to figure out what limitations or issues are, and then you iterate quickly with AI to do the development, right? Earlier, obviously, you would write the code. You would write the test cases as well. You would have to think through the test cases completely, and then you would run those unit test cases to ensure the code was perfect, right? Now going forward, AI could help you with writing test cases as well. So unit test cases, 60, 70, 80% of the scenarios would definitely be covered by AI. And like a lot of people are saying that, with AI coming in, developers would need to apply lesser, brain power, or would not have to think a whole lot. But I think that's not the right way to think about it. I think basically even earlier on, when we had to write our own code, that was a simpler thing. But understanding somebody else's code and fixing or improving that code was a much harder challenge, where much more skills were required. Similarly, with this now, with AI writing the code, you'll still have to look at the code. You'll still have to, go deeper into the code. So that's where your mental skills or brain power would be used a lot more compared to earlier on. And even now, even with testing as well, basically AI would generate test cases that would cover 80%, let's say 70-80% of the scenarios, right? But then you'll have to read through those test cases and figure out remaining 20% or your remaining 15%, and do a complete coverage of the functionality. So that's where it's becoming a little more difficult. And earlier we used to get very detailed requirements, and we would start from function level and we'd go up from there. But now you'll get a feature request, and then you'll drill down from there, and you'll implement the complete thing, right? So that's how the complete process of development is evolving. Writing code by hand was a very slow process, right? But AI can generate code really fast. Once you've decided as to what it needs to do, once you've given it a prompt, it will quickly generate that code. So you can iterate with that code, you can test with that code, right? If it's not working, you can regenerate the code, right? So that process would become a lot faster. And once you learn this process, how you have to use AI effectively, then you would become a lot more efficient as a developer. Now coming to the most important part of this complete shift, there has to be a mindset shift that has to happen. It's easy to learn tools, it's easy to adapt to new processes, but the new mindset that you have to develop, that takes a bit of time, right? So that's where you have to put in a lot of effort to try to figure out what is now expected of you, which is where I think the freshers who are going to start in the industry, let's say in a couple of years, in 2-3 years time, they would still be starting from that fresh mindset, so they would not have to do a shift in mindset. But people who are already in the industry, who've already spent 2-3-4 years, they will have to go through that major mindset shift. So earlier our current mindset was basically output, that this is what is required from me, this is exactly what I have to do, you were exactly told, and you would exactly deliver what needs to be done, right? And your mindset was, you were totally focused on the skill. You have to know the language really well, you have to know all the nuances of the language so that you can write performant code, you can write efficient code, right? All of that was your primary focus. Your primary skill was the code, was the programming language, and design patterns and all. But not anymore, right? And then you were completely bounded by the specs that were provided to you by the project manager or the tech lead. So those were very tight and very specific things that you have to achieve. Not anymore. Now the things are going to be very different in terms of how you approach the task, right? Now, like I already said, it's going to be outcome based. So for example, you'll be given a very specific functionality that this needs to be implemented. You figure out how to do it best, and you will use AI to do that. That's where your role is expanding, right? And then you have to think a lot of times from the user's perspective. When the user uses this application, what will they feel? Will they enjoy this interaction, or will they not, right? So that is coming into your purview now. Earlier it was not. Earlier it would have been a designer's or UI expert prerogative to kind of define all the user interactions and everything, right? But your skill, your time devotion towards writing code is going to reduce, but you'll have to think through different perspectives now. And then you'll have to be a problem solver. So while coding with AI, obviously you'll get stuck at a lot of points. You'll have to dig deeper into the code. You'll have to get your hands dirty. So that's where your core skill will come into play. If you know the code, if you know how the language works, when AI gets stuck, you'll be able to guide it through. You'll be get into the code and fix it on your own. That's going to be really important, and that's where your debugging skills or your problem solving skills would really come in handy, right? So those things are going to be really important. So just to give you a very concrete example on how requirements evolve and how as a developer you need to dig deeper and figure out what's the best way to do it and things like that. So I was recently working on a voice to voice AI agent where I could talk to the agent and agent would talk back to me. Okay. And I was trying to implement a mobile application for that. So now the requirement was that I should be able to talk to that agent via mobile application, and the agent should be able to respond, right? That was a very simple one-line requirement statement that it should be able to do it. And to implement that was really not very difficult using Agentic, right, development stack. So I researched a little bit on how voice works with mobile applications, and then I gave that an interesting prompt to the agent, and the agent was, after some effort, able to develop that, right? So I could speak on my phone, and then the voice would go through to server and it would come back. Now, once I was able to achieve that, I kind of realized that, as a user, at times I'll be using, the speakerphone, and at times I might even want to use my headphones, right? So that's where the requirement, I was able to quickly figure out, the requirement should be basically use speakerphone while it's available, and then maybe if the user switches over to headphone, use that as well, right? So after the first iteration, I quickly wanted to implement that. And then basically the moment I had, this working, that, if you start with a speaker phone, it works via speaker. And if you start with a headphone, it works via headphone channel, right? Then I realized that, if while during the conversation I plug in my headphones, then it has to automatically seamlessly transition into that, right? So all of these requirements that were coming into my mind was based on the experiences that I've had. I've been using YouTube, or everybody uses YouTube, right? So you know that seamless flow happens. If the call comes in, how does the voice application behave, right? So those things we've experienced in past. Client would not give you all of these details. Client would just tell you, implement voice to voice. Now you have to figure out that, there has to be seamless transition from speaker to headphone to back to speaker if the headphone is out, right? If the call comes in, you have to very quickly kind of, put the application on hold, or whatever the behavior has to be, right? And then it goes back. So all of those nuances, all of those details were earlier being detailed out by the project manager. But now as a developer, you got one line of statement as what needs to be done. You could iterate on that with AI, or you could use your experience to basically come up with the detailed requirements and then start implementing it, or you implement the high level thing, see it working, and then you iterate over it and do more fine-grained implementation, right? With the implementation also, at times agents would get stuck. That's where your debugging skills, that's where so what happened with me was, when I was trying to implement this transition from speaker into headphone, right? The mobile side connection would stop, and then it will try to reestablish a connection on the server side. And so the model that I was using got stuck. It tried one solution, and then it tried the second solution, and then tried the third solution, and then it started going in loop, and then went to the first solution again. And which is where I realized that, I've been asking to do it, but it's not able to do it. But it's just stuck between these 2 or 3 different types of problems, right? So the moment I realized that, then I knew that, what's happening on the server side, because I have been developing that application, which is where I asked the model to look at the server side socket implementation, how those sockets are working, and then based on that do the mobile side implementation, right? So the moment I was able to give that perspective to the model, it was able to quickly figure out, what mistakes it was making, and it was able to get out of that, 1, 2, 3 kind of loop, which is what we used to do with the developers as well. For example, junior developers would get stuck with, some of the problems, which is where they would go to tech lead, and tech lead would talk them through with all the implementation, and that's where the problems used to get solved. So the point is, as a developer, your role is not going away, right? You have to be in the driver's seat still. It's just that you're using AI to do the deeper implementation in terms of coding. Yes, I know the AI is not very efficient right now, and it's not very effective as well right now, but it's evolving, right? So if you start learning now, we know that there are huge improvements that's happening in models every 6 months, right? And with latest Gemini model or Claude 4.5 Sonnet, they are very efficient model. They do a lot of things, right? So that's where you need to learn these, know the problems that you're facing, and you will realize that the moment next new model comes in, a lot of these problems are getting solved automatically. So you have to still be in charge in terms of, what's happening on the server, what sockets I've opened, what queues I've created. So those kind of things which were not under your purview earlier on. You were just implementing a piece of function or a piece of class, right? But now as a developer, those things are even expected from you, right? So just to summarize, AI is not here to simply take your job. It's here to change the nature of your job. Your value is shifting from I type fast and no syntax to I understand systems, I think clearly, and I can use AI effectively to build real products. If you start investing in learning these tools now, and you adapt your mindset and processes, you won't just survive AI, you will actually ride it. If you found this useful and want me to go deeper into any specific part, like tools, workflows, or live demos for agentic coding, let me know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment box and I'll get back to you on that. Thank you.